Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development Committee. My name is Councillor George Courtauld and I am the chairman of this committee. We will now go through a few items of housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can members use the exit to the rear of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Please can you make sure that your phones and devices are switched to silent. If members wish to speak during our debates this evening, please can you indicate by raising your hand, and I will come to you at the appropriate time. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and to switch them off when they finish speaking. Can I also remind you that this meeting is being webcasted. I will now proceed with the main business of the meeting. Evening. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. We have received apologies from the following members: Councillor Sindhu Rajeev, Councillor Paul Thorogood and Councillor Toby Williams. Are there any further apologies?
Chairman, I'm not aware of any other apologies. Thank you.
As there are no further apologies, I will proceed with agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest. As there are no declarations, I will proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members were asked to approve the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 10th of April 2024. Please can I have a proposer to approve the minutes? Thank you. Please can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Edwards. All those in favour? Thank you, members. The minutes are approved. Do I sign them, or do I sign it later?
Initial each page.
And sign the last
Sign
one.
at the end, yeah.
I will now proceed with agenda item 4, public question time. As we have no registered speakers for this evening's meetings, I will proceed with the next item of business, which is agenda item 5, draft charging policy. Members, the report before you this evening is set out on pages 5 to 18 of the agenda. Please can I welcome Louisa Fisk, Strategic Finance Business Partner, to the meeting, who will be presenting the draft charging policy to the committee this evening. We are also joined by Phil Myers, Head of Finance, who will be supporting the report alongside Louisa. To clarify, the draft policy is being brought forward for our consideration in anticipation of its approval by the Cabinet Member for Finance, Resources and Performance. Louisa, I'd be grateful if you could present your report. We will then open the floor to questions from members. Over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much. So as Councillor Courtauld has already indicated, I am pleased to introduce this new draft charging policy to you. It will be a public-facing document, and the intention is that we will publish it on our internet page. So one of the first fundamental things I want to cover is that we're not saying that any charge already in place is incorrect or unlawful, but as a result of a review by commercial.gov in 2023 of the Council's commercial activity, it became apparent that the understanding of how charges within the Council were either calculated, applied or approved was relatively mixed. So it was agreed that we needed a corporate policy to resolve this and establish a framework to which services can work. I have reviewed policies of other local authorities and found some good practice and used those together with our own main principles to help draft this document so far. The draft policy has been reviewed by Management Board and wider CMT, as well as the Investment and Development Programme Board. I'll quickly run through the document and the key points, highlighting the pages as I go along, if that's okay. So it's laid out with the introduction first, which is on page 10, and then our corporate approach, which confirms that this policy is endorsed by members and the Chief Exec and senior managers. And even though I'm not going to go into the policy statement now, that's on page 11, we've then converted the policy statement into defined key principles that we want to make internal staff and the public aware of. So and I will list these out. So they are: users of chargeable discretionary services are expected to pay the full cost of the service, so rather than being subsidised by the general taxpayer. Approval for services must be provided at source via the governance if they are going to be subsidised or concessionary in any way. Approval for new charges must follow the governance set out in this policy. Users of chargeable discretionary services must be aware of the charge prior to either the service or purchase, and the charges will be collected in advance wherever possible. They will be subject to annual review, including inflationary increases where permissible. Equality impact assessments must be completed at every full review to ensure that no citizen group are adversely or favourably impacted. And finally, but not least, all charges will be subject to a periodic in-depth review at least once every 3 years. Page 12, the policy goes into the different types of charges, and it defines the difference between statutory and discretionary services, and where charges are set nationally by legislation, including those with no charge. But also it has a note at the bottom that basically also clarifies that we have some statutory services that contain a mix of nationally set or locally set charges. Then on page 13, there's a diagram showing the varying different mechanisms that we can use for calculating the charges of our discretionary services. So at the top, we've got the full cost recovery, making sure that we at least break even for that service and that we're not subsidising the service in any way by other tax resources. Then it goes down in a scale. So we've got subsidised, where you might want to make an activity or service more widely available or target particular groups. Then we've got concessions, where you might want people to be aware of the charge but continue to make it widely available. And then there's nominal, where you want to charge for a service so it limits inappropriate or overuse of those services, as well as those with that are free of charge. On the same page, clarification is given to other items that are needed when considering creating or setting charges. So things like, what is the external market, how are they behaving with this particular service? Does the external market have capacity? Whether it's changing by other factors, so technological developments, economical changes, etc., and what other local authorities are doing in this field as well. So a bit of benchmarking needs to be thought of up front as well. Then the paper goes on to define full cost recovery as standard on page 14. It explains what is meant by including all costs. So we have direct costs and indirect costs, and some of them may change depending on the service. But basically, we will be reviewing every cost associated with that service. I'm currently also working on a piece of work establishing and confirming the most efficient and transparent ways of apportioning the central support costs for the authority. And this will feed in nicely to this policy, as it will enable services to understand how they use central support services and by what basis they are being interdepartmentally charged for them as well. The section on agreed discounts, also on page 14, highlights the need for a business case for any charge less than full cost recovery. And that's in order to make sure that we consider the reasons and justifications legally for not doing full cost recovery, and also to make sure that the equality impact assessments are done in the correct manner as well. So if a service cannot be approved with an agreed discount, and that may be for all sorts of reasons, but in particular it might be because the market is behaving differently, then it is appropriate to review whether the service should continue to be provided. Page 15 The section detailing the administration and notification of charges sounds rather dull, but it's basically explaining the need to be efficient and effective with the calculation, the data gathering and the income collection for each of those charges as well, and making sure that service users are aware of the charges and pay for them upfront as default. So ideally using online payment wherever possible to reduce the number of personal interactions and reduce the staff time in administering the charges. Also on page 15 we've got the schedule for charges, and this does currently exist, but we will be asking for more information from services each year on their charges that will sit behind the schedule that's published. So, for example, what level of the charge it is, so whether it's full cost recovery or concession, and whether the governance is behind that. For example, then also volume data that sits behind the charge calculations if they're available. And if they're not available, then we'll be working with the services in order to understand how we can work towards the data gathering for that volume. The penultimate page, page 16 of this agenda, contains the considerations which are required when regularly reviewing charges. So things like reviewing our costs, reviewing our volumes, our savings targets within the authority, changes in scope for charging potential, so whether there's been legislative changes or not, whether we want to adopt phased approaches for price increases, and if there is any future investment required for service development. It then sets out the legal acts and other guidance used to draw up this document, but also used to enforce charges across local authorities. Page 17 is the interesting governance bit for some, and it's mentioned throughout the document. It's Annex A, and it's basically derived from the current constitution and has been used to reflect all points of decision for charges. I do want to just draw your attention back to the decision report, so that's paragraph 6 on page 7 of the agenda, because it mentions from a financial perspective things that I just want to highlight to you in a little bit more detail. So risks exist currently because we don't have a formal policy at present where we are uncertain of the consistency of understanding around charges. But this policy may bring opportunities to optimise our use of charges, being able to flex where appropriate, and where there's opportunity to vary charges for services. So that's the paper. The policy, once agreed, will be implemented immediately but in a phased approach. So we will action it once approved by Councillor Bowers. We'll go live with it immediately, but it will be a phased approach to actually get every fee and charge up and running using the policy, because that's quite a big job. So we will consider how this might be best aligned to the service review programme as well. Managers will also need some training and development as to how they can apply the policy to their service areas. That's what I wanted to say. So if there are any questions, I will hand back to Councillor Courtauld for comments, please.
Thank you, Louisa. That was very thorough, rather brilliant. And I think we do need to sort of homogenise our charging. Do any members have any questions or comments? Councillor Jeffers.
Thank you. I wonder if you could give us some examples of the charges, really, because it doesn't. Would it be things like special collection charges, land charges, those sort of things? Is that what we're talking about?
It's predominantly, well, it is the discretionary charges. So anything that we have the option to charge for or not. So things like pest control, for example, is one. That's a discretionary service, so we have discretion over what we charge for it. Without going down a rabbit hole or mentioning certain other ones, we've got car parking, but then there are all sorts of other ones as well.
Could
Far
I
away.
mean,
Phil.
essentially, so you may recall as part of the budget papers, there's a whole schedule of fees and charges that come and is part of the approval process for the budget. So essentially, it's predominantly what's in there, and it does cover quite a range. As you say, things like land charges, special collections, and the like. So, yeah, you'd get a flavour from just looking through that of what this is covering, but it is quite extensive.
So would that then take that out of the budget making? Because what we've done in the past is like put like a 2% increase on or 5% increase on or whatever on all, just really across the board. So would that then make these kind of individual prices, or it would still go through that same budget process?
Phil, far away, sorry.
Yeah, sure. So now the normal governance processes will still work. So we will still do that review. You know, that process through full council where they're setting the fees and charges. There are areas where there are delegations in place where cabinet members can take certain decisions because of the need to be a bit more flexible, and it's not can't be structured around that February deadline because there's certain other external factors. But I think the policy is really just around the framework, the structure that the services will be working to in order for them to put those fees and charges together and then put those into the proposals for the recommended decision-making process, whatever that is. But no, we won't see any change in that budget side of the process.
Councillor Finken.
Obviously, it's a good thing to have a more consistent approach, but is it likely to lead to substantial increases in charges for certain services in the way that the charges were introduced for the garden waste collection service, for example, which might have PR consequences?
The short answer is I don't know. We don't know. So that's part of why this policy is, and actually rolling this out and making sure that people understand how the framework will work and how to calculate, how to build up a charge is going to be important. No, I think that's why we've also put in here about this the possibility and consideration for if it does have certain PR implications, then we've got the ability to then do phased approach. So acknowledge the fact that we are either short on charges for the not covering the costs, then we've got the ability to kind of say, yes, we are short, therefore we'll gradually increase it, yeah, if that's the case.
Councillor Edwards.
So I just had a question on what on page 13, an unlawful surplus, what that would be categorised as.
So, with certain, even discretionary charges, depending on the service type, there may be legislation around those services themselves that basically mean that we wouldn't be allowed to make certain surpluses. So if that is the case, then we would just need to make sure that we're complying with the legislation for those charges. If there are other things that kind of, if there are other legislation that enables us to consider other services as part of that charge, so for the wider good of Braintree District Council, for example, then we'd be able to consider the full package as such for those charges.
Thank you. Could you give me an example of a service where creating a surplus would be unlawful?
No, but that's because I haven't delved into each of the charges individually and their legislation. So that's going to be down to the services to really understand themselves and to confirm that they've actually been able to look at it and look at the legislation and confirm to us that it complies. there's one example. So car parking is one that does have Road and Traffic Act legislation alongside it, but that does mention surpluses in that act as well. So it's those kind of legislation that gives us the power in certain situations.
Thank you. Just on page 14, something that I want a clarification on as well was the point on the cost of a reduced service not being borne by other users. Does that mean where a concession is granted to a certain user base, so that is paid for centrally rather than in the charge of everyone else?
Exactly that, yes. So it won't be, if there is like a set of charges, for example, and you have different tiers, then any concessionary charge would not be borne by anybody paying for a higher price. It wouldn't be altogether covering itself. That concessionary cost would have to come from the general fund or revenue.
Okay, thank you very much. And page 15, I've written on my pad promptly and timely, and I think that's when charges should be levied, although now I can't see that, so that's not massively helpful. But I just wondered if you could clarify what promptly and timely meant in terms of recovering charges. Although now I can't see it, which is incredibly helpful.
I found it. So it's invoices should be issued promptly and clearly.
Invoices, yes, sorry, invoices.
It's basically just making sure that if we do have to send out invoices post-event or post-service, that they are done in a timely manner so that people don't forget and they don't then get lost, and we're able to recover the charges effectively.
And what is a timely manner in the view of your...
That'll be down to the service.
Okay.
So at each charge point, that'll be determined by the services themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Could I just comment on the chair? Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it will vary from service, because I think there'll be some services where the level of activity is sort of not great, and likelihood is that they'll maybe do a job, and then we'd expect, they'll probably then invoice it straight away, or requisition an invoice to be raised. But there'll be some areas where the volumes are such where they probably will have a periodic point where they say, right, we're going to raise all the charges for that period now. So I think it will sort of vary, but I think it's just making clear to services we don't want, undue delay and then people saying, oh, well, I had a service 6 months ago and you've just billed me for it, sort of thing. So
the other thing that recurs, one thing that actually recurs throughout this document is this invocation of raising charges with inflation. I just wanted to know which measure of inflation you use when you work that out.
Yeah, I think it depends on the service, but normally it would be CPI.
Okay.
But it does depend on what the particular service is for and which bucket of inflation would be more suitable for it.
Okay, thank you. And actually, just final question. I found the table at the end slightly confusing, hence why I'm asking this question. If a new fee is proposed, would that ordinarily be brought to a meeting of the full council, or would that instead be something decided on by the cabinet?
So I've interpreted the Constitution, and I think I've interpreted it correctly, but it is the decision maker will remain the cabinet member, and depending on the interest, the political interest of those particular services or the charge, then it would depend on how they consult with full council as to whether it goes to the meeting.
And the cabinet member would make that judgment. Okay. And I just noted that as well that there is a review carried out of charges every 3 years. Do you think there would be any appetite to every 3 years have a vote on reinstating charges? I'm just a slightly wider concern I have about this council at the moment is that we have these full council meetings and not a lot is brought in front of them, and we seem to get a lot of delegated decision emails of people making decisions elsewhere that we can still scrutinise, perfectly well via email, but that we don't tend to get much debate happening at full council. And I wondered if perhaps in your view it would be appropriate when we conduct these reviews every 3 years of charges to then bring them to full council to have it debated whether or not we should continue that charge, or whether that charge is appropriate, whether the increase in a charge is particularly appropriate.
So bearing in mind that not all the charges will be reviewed at the same 3-year point, it'll be staggered, I think that would be rather difficult. But each one in its own merit should be brought forward every 3 years. But I think it would be down to the legal position and governance as to how that's then taken forward.
Yeah, so I think there's a... Get the right button, you think I get used to it by now. I think there's a number of things at play, and it will... don't want to keep saying, but it depends, but it actually does. Every charge should go through a review every 3 years. How that comes in the cycle will depend on when that charge came into being initially. Full council obviously has the full charges schedule as part of the budget setting, so that goes through your scrutiny committees, the corporate scrutiny committees, for 2 rounds. It then goes obviously to Cabinet as well, when members are invited to come along to, before going to Council as part of the agreement, and that's an annual basis as well. So you will get an opportunity annually to look at the fees and charges from a budget perspective. And then obviously the review will happen on individual charges as they come up. So there are those that come forward, and if you look at the Cabinet agendas there, you'll see them on there as well. Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Chair, I've taken up far too much of it.
Councillor Hayes.
Thank you. Just going on that point then, so where you staggered, have we got a list of what kind of decisions are going to be made first, or is that what costs will be reviewed first? Have you got like a priority list of that, or?
No. As alluded to in the policy, well, in the decision report, sorry, we are hoping to have them... we're hoping to have charges kind of incorporated into each of the service reviews. So that will be, if it's not, that could be part of the process, but it could mean that some services that are reviewed later as part of the service review process will be, the charges will be reviewed earlier. So I can't really, we haven't really got a confirmed timeline yet.
And then just one more thing, on page 11 we've got EQIA in capitals, which you've said something impact assessment. Could we get that? That's not written anywhere else, and I don't. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to provide comment. Obviously, we haven't had a charging policy or a revised one for a very long time. So this is almost the start of that process. And on the back of this, we will start building some pipelines around charges that we do have and bringing them forward for reviews in a timely manner. So this is almost stage 1 of what would be a very long process in unpicking our fees and charges. If you look at the budget report that goes down, there is a very detailed schedule with many lines on it of all the charges that we have, statutory or otherwise. And to build that into a pipeline will take some time to do.
Any other questions? Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we've been asked to consider the draft policy as set out at Appendix 1 and to make any comments or recommendations prior to its approval by the Cabinet Member for Finance, Resources and Performance. Are there any recommendations that members wish to make? Thank you, members. Can I take it then that the report has been considered and noted? Can I ask for a show of hands? Fantastic. The report has been noted. Thank you, Louisa and Phil, for your attendance this evening and for the responses to our questions. Please feel free to leave the meeting, but you are, of course, welcome to remain. Thanks, Phil. And Louisa, I know you have important things to do. Have a fun evening. Members, we will now proceed to agenda item 6, draft work programme 2024-25. Members, the report for this item is set out on pages 19 to 26 of your agendas and details the draft work programme of the Corporate Policy Development Committee for 2024-25. Please can I invite Jessica Mann, Scrutiny Officer, to set out the report.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. So I just want to quickly take you through the report which sets out the intended draft work programme of this committee for 2024-25. So just before I go into the detail of the report, I just want to everyone to note that this work programme will be a live document or a rolling document which is able to be updated, reviewed, amended by the committee throughout the course of the year and beyond. So work programme as it currently is isn't necessarily how it will look in a few months' time. It depends on how our work progresses as a committee. So just to give you a bit of context to how this work programme has come to be, as part of the development of the Council's annual scrutiny work programme, there have been a number of topics which have been identified for the purposes of scrutiny review. The first round of these topics, which we'll be calling Tranche 1, have been identified by Management Board in conjunction with the Chairman of the Scrutiny Committees, so it's Councillor Courtauld, Councillor Wrench and Councillor Heath. So those topics have been identified due to their timeliness, their alignment with the Council's priorities and their likely impact on the district, and they're ongoing topics that are quite relevant at the moment. So the topics within Tranche 1 will be divided across the Corporate Policy Development Committee and the Corporate Scrutiny Committee as the central scrutiny committee. Obviously, the purpose of this committee is to look at topics from a policy perspective. So it's proposed that the first topic that this committee looks at is antisocial behaviour, because this is a topic that members of this committee have raised previously. It's also one that the chairman has expressed some interest in, and we thought it would be good to look at that from the perspective of the council's policies, but also obviously to look at the role and responsibilities of the council in respect of antisocial behaviour. So we've got another group of topics which have come forward as well from the call for topics, which you might recall took place in May. Those topics will form part of Tranche 2, of the scrutiny work programme. They are currently being assessed by Management Board, so they've come forward. We had about 6 topic suggestions. We went out to all members. Everyone was offered the opportunity to take part. So from those 6, Management Board are just currently assessing those in conjunction with the scrutiny chairman. And once we have more of an update on which topics of those can come forward, we will let everyone know accordingly. With regards to sort of further topic ideas, if members, even though we've got these topics lined up for the committee to look at, if members have any other topic ideas that they might wish to bring forward at any point, members are welcome to do that. You don't have to wait for a formal call for topic process or suggestions from Management Board, but obviously they will still need to follow the same procedure. So we'll receive the topic will be assessed on its merits and value to the organisation at the current time, and we may include it within the work programme, but there's no guarantee that it will be. It will just depend on the assessment of the topic at that time. So just to remind you, Appendix 1 within the report shows the draft work programme of the committee. That work programme, I've divided it into 2 sections just to make it a bit more readable. So the first section is the scheduled items, where we have much more of an idea of the timeframes for the topics in there, so when they're going to come forward for review. You will see that I've also added in, we have a few policies draft policies that are come forward, like with the draft charging policy. They're expected to come forward at the October meeting, so I've added those in. But these, we have an idea of those timeframes. For other ones, the timelines that I've included in there are more indicative. They might change as we proceed with the work. And the second part of the work programme is just topics to be scheduled. So this is where we haven't had an identified or any kind of indicative time frame come forward for those to actually come before the committee. But we intend to address those at some point throughout the year. We just need to determine when that's going to be. I think that's all I need to just make you aware of. But obviously, just to stress that this is a rolling work programme, we are asking you to agree it tonight, but, we can certainly make amendments, to the work programme if you're not happy with certain aspects of it. We will bring this forward regularly to the committee for you all to review and update if necessary as we progress throughout the year. So I think that was all I'd like to say on it, this, Chairman, but, I'm happy to take any questions about the work programme.
Thank you, Jess. Any questions, members? Could I have missed you, Councillor Edwards, far away?
Sorry. I might be being incredibly thick, and in fact I probably am. I'm really pleased that the 5 topics that have been suggested have been taken up. They're all absolutely the areas I think we should be focusing on, and all the areas that, we gripe about, A, as councillors, and B, on the doorstep, the residents feedback to us that the council we need to look at. So I'm really pleased about that. The only thing that I have a question over is the schedule. So I understand what we're doing for the next couple up until October. Is the plan for the December, February and April ones to be the top one, 3 of those 5 topics?
Yes, so the other 5 topics won't necessarily all be coming to this committee. They will be divided across as appropriate from the Corporate Scrutiny Committee and us. So topics such as the NEP, so the North Essex Parking Partnership, that will come before the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. The antisocial behaviour, and I think it was voluntary sector working, has been highlighted for this committee. And obviously we'll have the topics from Tranche 2 that have come from the call for topics coming forward as well. So we will assess those and see which is the appropriate committee to take those topics forward. And obviously at the moment, because we don't have actual timeframes, determined for those, that's why I've left it a bit more vague in the work programme as it is. So they're to be confirmed as it currently stands.
Cool, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jeffries.
So on the antisocial behaviour that we're going to be discussing on the 4th of September, can you tell us a bit more about, and I know that the lead members, the lead officer has not been decided yet, but how we might be taking that forward? Thank you.
So I would say the next report in the agenda goes into the detail of that topic. So it may well be your question is answered, Councillor Jeffries, at the next report. But if it's not, by all means, raise it again and we'll go through that at the time.
Any other questions, members? Sorry. If there are no further questions, we're asked to agree the draft work programme of the Corporate Policy Development Committee for 2024-25. Please can I have a proposer to move the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Bond, and please can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Finken. Members, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. I will now proceed to the vote. All members in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Thank you, members. The recommendation has been approved. We will now proceed with the next item of business, agenda item 7, terms of reference for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour. Members, for the report for this item is set out on pages 27 to 29 of the agenda. The report sets out the proposed terms of reference for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour. Please can I invite Jessica Mann, Scrutiny Officer, to set out the report.
Thank you, Chairman, and hello again, members. So this report outlines the proposed terms of reference for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour, which we are proposing as the first scrutiny review that this committee undertakes. So the terms of reference, just to explain, set out the parameters for the scrutiny review and include things like key lines of inquiry for the committee to answer as part of their investigation. And so forth. They also identify things like potential lead officers and witnesses that we might call upon to help provide evidence in support of the review and such like. So the key lines of inquiry within the terms of reference are identified at paragraph 3.32 of the report. And these key lines of inquiry have been identified based on some of the feedback that we've had from both members of the committee and also from the scrutiny chairman, Councillor Courtauld, and also from management board. So the topic of antisocial behaviour, as I mentioned in the previous report, will form part of tranche 1 of the committee's work programme for this current year. So just to highlight what the actual purpose of the review into antisocial behaviour will be. So the purpose of the review will be to explore the roles, the responsibilities and the powers of the council and the effectiveness of the council's policies around antisocial behaviour. Certain aspects of the council, such as I think planning, will be excluded from the review, but other aspects obviously we can look at. And we've tried to just reflect as much, give it as much structure as we can within the key lines of inquiry that are set out in the report. So the committee this evening really is being asked to consider the terms of reference as they're set out in the report and to agree them as well, so that we can proceed with the scrutiny review at the next meeting. I should add that, once the terms of reference are agreed, we can still, if we don't feel perhaps later on down the line that they're fully working for us, that we need to add perhaps further questions or reword some, we can look at them again and update that as we go. But for the moment, we just need an agreed set of terms of reference so that we can proceed with the next stage of the committee's work programme. So, Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions. Back over to you.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just wondering, under key lines of inquiry, whether we ought to have another line, which is talking about something like, what else could the council do or support others or encourage others to do to improve services that would help to reduce antisocial behaviour? Because actually this is looking at what we do, but perhaps we're losing an opportunity here to have a blue sky thought about what may or may not be possible.
Okay, could I just ask you to repeat that again, Councillor Bond? So I've just got, just so I've got it in my mind for my notes, what question that you'd like to add?
What the council could do in the future or support or encourage others to do in developing other antisocial behaviour interventions.
Kimmy, you had a comment.
I did. I've got no issue with that being added. My only hesitation was around, we did do a scrutiny topic in the last administration around antisocial behaviour partnership working. And as part of this, if this is agreed as a way forward, that report will be circulated to members. So what we want to do is we don't want to cross over into what that review looked at and the recommendations that came out in the back. But I certainly think you can look at influencing others without actually looking at the partnership side, but just a slight hesitation around that.
Councillor Jeffries.
Thank you, Jessica. Of course, it did answer most of what I was talking about, really. But going to what Kim just said, and so the review that was done, it's not really about the terms of reference, but would it be useful for us to see that document? And also, there may have been other reviews previously. I know that some considerable time ago, there was quite a big document compiled by the scrutiny team, and that may or may not still be relevant, but it might be useful to have, rather than sort of reinvent the wheel, if there's any documents that are already available, it might be useful that we have sight of those.
No, completely, don't disagree with that. So what the normal process is once we've got the terms of reference in a form that you're happy with, or at least got the nuts and bolts of it to start fleshing it out, is Jessica will go away and pull all of those documentations together. She will provide you with a ton of research to undertake and some links to key documentation and websites and information that's already available for you. And then the intention would be at the first meeting is you would have what's kind of a knowledge leveller. So we would give you some information and knowledge around ASB, what the council's role is, etc., so that you're all brought up to the same point of understanding. And then from that, you then explore into the topic in accordance with your key line and inquiries. We do encourage members to go away and do some of their own research around this, but also Jess works incredibly hard in the background to provide as much information as she can to help support you in bringing forward a meaningful review that you can get some good recommendations out of put forward to Cabinet. So yes, you will get a lot of information from Jessica going forward. Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you, members. If there are no further questions, we're asked to agree the proposed terms of reference for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour. Please can I have a proposer to move the recommendation? Councillor Finkin. Please can I have a seconder? Councillor Williams, thank you. Members, the recommendation has been moved and... Oh, do I need a show of hands? I do, don't I? Probably.
Yes, please.
Yes. Could I have a show of hands? I think that's pretty unanimous. Thank you. Members, the recommendation has been moved and seconded. I will now proceed to the vote. I've had your raised hands. Thank you, members. I would just add that it is anticipated that the committee's first evidence gathering session for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour will take place at the meeting scheduled for the 16th of October 2024. Officers from the Council's operations team will be in attendance to provide evidence to the committee, and members will be sent preliminary information on the topic of antisocial behaviour to help them prepare in advance of this session. Urgent business and close the meeting. Members, as we do not have any urgent business, this item concludes our business for this evening. The next scheduled meeting of the Corporate Policy Development Committee is due to take place on Wednesday the 4th of September. However, we do not have any substantive business scheduled for this meeting, as it is a rescheduled meeting from the general election in July. Furthermore, the first evidence gathering session for the scrutiny review into antisocial behaviour is scheduled for the meeting on the 16th of October. I am therefore minded to cancel the September meeting and wish to give members prior notice to this, and I will confirm the cancellation via email. I would like to thank all those who've watched this meeting online and in the chamber. I will now close this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development Committee at, can't see the clock, 8:03. Thank you all for your attendance. Have a good evening.